8 words. That's all it took. When Roger Federer looked at the camera and said, "She is the future of world tennis," the entire tennis world seemed to hold its breath. Not because Federer says things like that often, he doesn't, but because the girl he was talking about was a 20-year-old from the Philippines, a country the sport had barely noticed before. And somehow, that made it all the more remarkable. But here's what most people miss. The quote isn't even the most compelling part of this story. It's everything that had to happen before Federer ever said those words. To really understand what Alex Eala's rise means, you have to start with where she comes from. And you have to be honest about what that means. The Philippines has never been a tennis nation. That's not a slight. It's just the reality that every Filipino kid who ever picked up a racket has had to quietly reckon with. Tennis in Southeast Asia has long been the domain of country clubs and cable TV coverage of Wimbledon. The sports giants have almost always come from Europe, North America, or Australia. The Philippines gave the world Manny Pacquiao. It gave the world basketball legends and boxing icons, fighters with a fire that seemed almost supernatural. But Grand Slam champions? That conversation had never really started. Alex Eala was born on May 23, 2005, in Quezon City. Her father, Mike, ran a business. Her mother, Riza Manuela, was a former national swimmer who went on to become CFO of one of the country's largest telecom companies. Riza knew elite competition. She understood what discipline actually looked like when it wasn't performing for anyone. And when Alexandra's maternal grandfather, Bobby Mano, put a racket in her hands at age 4 on a quiet court in the Philippines, nobody had a clue that moment would eventually make Roger Federer stop and pay attention. At 13, Eala made a decision that would define her. She packed her bags and moved to Spain to train at the Rafael Nadal Academy, an institution built in Nadal's image, which means it was built on the idea that grit is not optional. It's the baseline. Imagine being a teenager, thousands of miles from your family, navigating a new language, a new culture, and an environment where excellence is just the starting point. She graduated in 2023. But what she built during those years went far beyond a cleaner forehand or a more reliable second serve. She was forging something harder to measure, the kind of mental composure that doesn't crack when the stadium is loud and the moment is enormous. In 2022, the world got its first real signal. At the US Open Junior Championships, 17-year-old Eala won the girls' singles title, becoming the first Filipino in history to claim a Grand Slam Junior Championship. Back home, families crowded around televisions they hadn't turned on in years. Parents texted their kids. There were tears in living rooms across the country. It felt like something had cracked open. But a junior title, as meaningful as it is only a prologue. The real test was always going to come on the professional tour, where the competition is relentless and the margin for error is almost nothing. Her early professional years were humbling. Rankings stuck in the 200s. Qualifying losses that barely registered. Early exits at small ITF events that nobody streamed. This is the stretch of a tennis career that breaks most promising juniors. Not in a dramatic way, but quietly, match by match, until one day they stop showing up. By 2024, Eala had climbed to around world number 143. Respectable, but not exactly the kind of number that gets people invoking the name of the greatest player in history. Nothing on paper screamed generational talent. But what the rankings couldn't capture was the foundation underneath. The Nadal Academy had installed something in her that doesn't show up in stats. A work ethic that keeps going even when the spotlight has moved on. Then came March 2025. The Miami Open, one of the most prestigious hard-court events in the world, a tier below the Grand Slams but loaded with the same caliber of talent. Eala entered as a wild card, ranked around 140. The cynical read was that she was there to sell tickets to Filipino fans. A good story. A feel-good moment. Not a real threat. She won her first match. Wild cards do that sometimes. Then she beat Yelena Ostapenko, a former French Open champion. People leaned forward. Then she took down Madison Keys, the reigning Australian Open champion. The whispers turned into something louder. And then she beat Iga Swiatek, world number 2, 5-time Grand Slam champion, one of the most dominant forces women's tennis has seen in a decade. in straight sets. A wild card. Back-to-back wins over the number 5 and number 2 players in the world. In the same tournament. It had never been done by a Filipino player in WTA history, and rarely by anyone ranked outside the top 100 in recent memory. The stadium in Miami wasn't ready for it. Filipino fans who had flown thousands of miles, some spending money they probably shouldn't have, erupted in the kind of celebration you can't manufacture. Overseas workers watched on their phones in office hallways, in break rooms, at 2 in the morning in apartments across the United States. A lot of them were crying. Openly. Not embarrassed about it at all. ESPN wrote that she carries the weight of an entire nation every time she steps on the court. That week in Miami, it had never felt more true. She eventually fell to Jessica Pegula in the semifinals after a grueling 3-set battle. But by then, the scoreline was almost secondary. She had already proved everything she needed to prove. At 19 years old, she had walked into one of the sport's biggest events as a wild card and dismantled 2 of the best players of her generation. Roger Federer has been retired since 2022. But he has never really left tennis. He watches. He notices. And when he saw what happened in Miami, he didn't call a press conference or issue a statement. He just offered 8 words that detonated across the internet. She is the future of world tennis. From almost anyone else, that sentence is interesting. From Federer, someone who spent 2 decades at the absolute summit of the sport, it carries a different kind of weight. It's not flattery. It's a verdict. The tennis world erupted. Social media exploded. Headlines multiplied. And not everyone applauded. Former players pushed back. Analysts questioned whether the praise had come too early. But perhaps the most striking response came from Eala herself. Measured, grounded, completely unbothered by the noise. She wasn't swept up in it. That, in its own way, told you something. The fan response reflected how deeply the tennis world had already invested in her story. In one widely discussed poll, 79% of respondents chose Eala as their favorite over Coco Gauff, and 89% chose her over Emma Raducanu. Those aren't small margins. They show a global audience that had already decided something about this player. And the results kept coming. On February 9, 2026, Eala reached a career-high WTA singles ranking of world number 40, the highest any Filipino player had ever climbed. The first from her country to break into the top 40. She had beaten multiple top 5 players, reached a tour-level final, and made history as the first Filipino to reach a WTA 1000 semifinal. When the Dubai tournament finally gave her the center court final slot, the most coveted spot on the day's schedule, she delivered. Wins over Jasmine Paolini and Sara Errani. A quarter-final run that pushed her ranking even higher before she fell to Gauff. But this is also where the honest conversation has to happen. Because breathtaking tournament runs are one thing. Grand Slam titles, multiple ones sustained over years, are something else entirely. And Eala's Grand Slam record, at this point in her career, tells a more complicated story. Early exits. First-round losses. Qualifying setbacks. The gap between lighting up a WTA 1000 and dominating a major across 2 weeks is real. It's precisely where a lot of promising careers stall. Her first-round loss at the 2026 Australian Open made that gap visible. After dominating the opening set 6-0, she fell to Alicia Parks, ranked 99th at the time. Parks' serve overwhelmed her. The lesson was clear. Against opponents who hit big, Eala can't rely solely on her return game to control a match. She needs more variety on her own serve, especially when the score is tight and a free point could change everything. In Dubai, she was open about it. After losing to Gauff in the quarterfinals, she said plainly, "There's still definitely a gap between me and Coco." In an era of carefully curated social media and polished soundbites, a 20-year-old saying that out loud, without deflection, without excuses, stands out. It's the kind of self-awareness that Federer himself was always associated with. Not arrogance. Not false modesty. Just clear-eyed honesty about where you are and what the work ahead actually looks like. Here's the thing about Federer's endorsement that gets lost in the headline. He wasn't saying she was already finished. He was saying he recognized something in her, That particular combination of talent, resilience, and hunger that he has seen in 20 years of competing at the highest level lead to championships. He knows what that reflection looks like. And in Eala, he saw it. There was a quieter moment that said even more. In an interview room after one of the most emotionally demanding weeks of her career, Eala was asked what Federer meant to her. She talked about his grace, his composure on and off the court, the way he carried himself across 2 decades in the spotlight. Those aren't the words of someone chasing trophies. They're the words of someone who understands that greatness isn't just measured in titles. She also said something that suggested a perspective well beyond her age. Federer's retirement, she reflected, reminded her that even the greatest athletes are human. That every career has an end. That the window is finite. That awareness, at 20, is rare. It suggests she is not drunk on the applause. She understands what she's building and how much work it still requires. There's a Filipino worker in Abu Dhabi who said something that has stayed with people. He said that since the Pacquiao era, no Filipino athlete had captured the nation's collective spirit the way Eala has. The comparison to Manny Pacquiao, one of the most beloved figures in Philippine sporting history, says everything about the scale of what she has already become. And she hasn't won a Grand Slam yet. Let that sink in. The pride, the joy, the sense of belonging on a global stage, she has given all of that to a country of more than 100 million people before winning the sport's ultimate prize. Federer represented Switzerland, a nation already deeply embedded in tennis culture. Eala is building that foundation for the Philippines almost from scratch. She isn't just chasing titles. She's expanding what's considered possible. And that might be the heaviest, most powerful responsibility of all. So where does this go from here? The serve needs to improve. The Grand Slam results need to catch up to the headline wins. The tactical game needs another layer, especially on clay. These are developmental gaps, not fatal flaws. Every legend once stood in this same place. Serena Williams had gaps at 20. Federer had gaps at 20. The real question is never whether imperfections exist. It's whether the athlete has the character to close them. The courts of 2026 and beyond will give us that answer. But right now, one of the most credible voices the sport has ever produced has already cast his vote. And for a girl from Quezon City who started hitting balls with her grandfather at age 4, for a country that was never supposed to produce a tennis champion, that vote carries extraordinary weight. The future, it seems, has already introduced herself.